The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Westmarch Palace as King Edmund stood at his study window, staring out at the sprawling gardens below. At 63, he had ruled the kingdom of Aldoria for nearly 2 decades, but today felt different. The weight of the crown seemed heavier than usual, and the burden of a decision he had been avoiding pressed down on his shoulders like a stone. His marriage to Queen Isabella had been the subject of whispered conversations in royal circles for months. What had once been a partnership born of genuine affection had slowly transformed into something cold and distant. The public still saw them as the perfect royal couple, but behind closed doors, their relationship had become a carefully choreographed performance. Edmund's private secretary, James Morrison, knocked softly before entering. "Your Majesty, the morning briefings are ready, and the Prime Minister is requesting an audience regarding the upcoming state visit." "Cancel everything," Edmund said quietly, not turning from the window. "I need time to think." James hesitated. In his 15 years of service, he had never seen the king look so troubled. "Sir, if I may ask, is everything all right?" Edmund finally turned, his weathered face showing the strain of sleepless nights. "James, have you ever found yourself at a crossroads where every path leads to pain?" The question hung in the air between them. James had served the royal family long enough to understand that this wasn't about state matters or political decisions. This was deeply personal. "Sometimes, Your Majesty, the most difficult choices are the ones that set us free," James replied carefully. Edmund nodded slowly. The events of the past year had been building to this moment, and he could no longer ignore the growing distance between himself and Isabella. Their last private conversation had ended in silence, both of them acknowledging what neither wanted to say aloud. The Queen had been spending more time at her private estate in the countryside, claiming she needed space for her charitable work. But Edmund knew the truth. They had both changed, grown in different directions, and the love that had once bound them together had faded into polite coexistence. What made the situation even more complicated was the presence of Lady Victoria Ashworth, Isabella's closest friend and confidant for over a decade. Victoria had been a constant fixture in their lives, attending royal functions, accompanying Isabella on official visits, and gradually becoming an integral part of the royal household. But somewhere along the way, Victoria's influence had begun to shift the dynamics within the marriage. Edmund had noticed how Isabella seemed to seek Victoria's counsel on matters that she once would have discussed with him. Private jokes were shared between the two women, and Edmund often felt like an outsider in his own home. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during a private dinner. Edmund had suggested they take a vacation together, just the two of them, to reconnect and work on their relationship. Isabella had immediately turned to Victoria, asking if she thought it was a good idea. "Why does everything have to go through Victoria?" Edmund had asked, his frustration finally boiling over. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella had looked hurt, Victoria had excused herself from the room, and Edmund was left wondering how they had reached such a point. That night, lying in their separate bedrooms, Edmund had made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer live in a marriage where he felt like a third wheel, where important decisions were filtered through someone else, and where genuine intimacy had been replaced by public duty. Now, standing in his study with James, Edmund felt the weight of that decision. He knew what he had to do, but the consequences would be enormous. The royal family, the kingdom, the public who looked up to them as an example of stability and tradition, everyone would be affected. "James," Edmund said finally, "I need you to arrange a private meeting with my legal advisors. And, please, ensure complete discretion." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the request. "Of course, Your Majesty. May I ask when you would like this meeting to take place?" "This afternoon. There are some things that cannot wait any longer." As James left to make the arrangements, Edmund returned to his window. In the distance, he could see the rose garden where he and Isabella had been married 25 years ago. The ceremony had been called the wedding of the century, with thousands of guests and millions watching around the world. But fairy tales, Edmund thought bitterly, don't always have happy endings. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go, even when it breaks your heart to do so. The decision he was about to make would shock the kingdom and send ripples throughout the royal establishment. But for the first time in months, Edmund felt a sense of clarity. He could no longer live a lie, no matter how beautifully it was dressed up in royal protocol and public expectation. The king of Aldoria was about to make the most difficult decision of his reign, one that would change not just his own life, but the future of the monarchy itself. As the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, Edmund prepared to take the first steps toward a freedom that would cost him everything he had ever known. The legal consultation that afternoon proved to be more complex than Edmund had anticipated. Sir Richard Thornfield, the kingdom's most respected constitutional lawyer, sat across from the king in the private library, surrounded by thick volumes of royal law and constitutional precedent. "Your Majesty," Sir Richard said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "what you're contemplating would be unprecedented in all Doria's modern history. The last royal separation occurred over 2 centuries ago, and the circumstances were vastly different." Edmund listened intently as the lawyer outlined the legal implications. A royal separation would require parliamentary approval, constitutional amendments, and would likely trigger a crisis of confidence in the monarchy. The financial settlements alone would be staggering, involving not just personal assets but royal properties, art collections, and trust funds that had been accumulated over generations. "And the succession?" Edmund asked, though he already knew the answer would be troubling. Prince Alexander would remain the heir, but his position would be complicated by the circumstances. The public's perception of the royal family's stability is crucial for maintaining support for the monarchy itself. After Sir Richard left, Edmund sat alone with his thoughts. His son Alexander, now 35 and married with 2 young children, had always been the perfect prince. He was dedicated to his royal duties, beloved by the public, and had successfully modernized many aspects of the monarchy's public image. But how would he handle the scandal of his parents' separation? That evening, Edmund requested a private dinner with Prince Alexander and his wife, Princess Sarah. The young couple arrived at the palace looking concerned, having heard rumors that something significant was troubling the king. "Father, the entire palace staff seems on edge," Alexander said as they sat down to dinner in the small private dining room. "James mentioned you canceled all your appointments today." Edmund looked at his son and daughter-in-law, both of whom had built their own strong marriage based on genuine love and mutual respect. It pained him to realize how far his own relationship had strayed from that ideal. "Alexander, Sarah, I need to share something with you both, and I need your honest opinions, not just your loyalty as family members." Over the next hour, Edmund laid out the full extent of his marital problems. He spoke about the growing distance between himself and Isabella, Victoria's increasing influence on their relationship, and his growing sense of isolation within his own marriage. Princess Sarah, who had always been diplomatic in family matters, spoke first. "Your Majesty, have you and the Queen attempted counseling? Sometimes an outside perspective can help couples rediscover what they've lost." "We tried 6 months ago," Edmund admitted. But Isabella insisted that Victoria be included in the sessions. The counselor was confused, and I felt like we were treating symptoms rather than addressing the real problem. Prince Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. "Father, what exactly are you telling us? Are you considering separation?" The word hung in the air like a confession. Edmund nodded slowly. "I've already consulted with Sir Richard. The legal implications are enormous, but, Alexander, I can't continue living a lie. The public deserves authenticity from their royal family, even if it's painful." The conversation continued late into the night. Alexander and Sarah listened with growing concern as Edmund described feeling like a stranger in his own home, making decisions that were constantly second-guessed, and attending royal functions where he felt like an actor playing a role. "The final straw came last week," Edmund continued. "We were planning the guest list for the autumn ball, a tradition I've overseen for 20 years. Isabella deferred every decision to Victoria. When I suggested we invite my old friend Lord Pemberton, Isabella looked to Victoria for approval before agreeing. I realized I had become a figurehead in my own marriage." Princess Sarah reached across the table and touched Edmund's hand gently. "Your Majesty, whatever decision you make, we'll support you. But please consider the timing carefully. The kingdom is facing economic challenges, and political stability is crucial right now." Prince Alexander added, "Father, if you're truly unhappy, then something needs to change. But perhaps there's a way to address this without a formal separation. Could you and Mother try living separately for a while, without making it official?" Edmund had already considered this option, but he knew it would only delay the inevitable. The fundamental problem wasn't just the physical distance between them, but the emotional chasm that had grown over the years. "I appreciate your counsel," Edmund said finally. "But I've made my decision. Tomorrow, I'll speak with your mother privately. She deserves to hear this from me before anyone else." The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Edmund's mood as he prepared for the most difficult conversation of his life. Isabella had returned from her countryside estate the previous evening, and was having breakfast in her private sitting room when Edmund knocked on the door. "May I come in, Isabella? We need to talk." Queen Isabella looked up from her morning tea, immediately sensing the gravity in her husband's voice. At 58, she remained an elegant woman, but Edmund could see the weariness in her eyes that mirrored his own. "Of course, Edmund. Please, sit down." They had barely spoken privately in weeks, and the awkwardness between them was palpable. Edmund sat across from his wife of 25 years, searching for the right words to begin a conversation that would end their marriage. "Isabella, we both know this isn't working anymore," he began gently. "We've been pretending for months, maybe even years, but we can't continue like this." Isabella set down her teacup with slightly trembling hands. "What are you saying, Edmund?" "I'm saying that we've grown apart, and I don't think we can find our way back to each other. The distance between us has become impossible to bridge." Tears began to form in Isabella's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Is this about Victoria? I know you feel she's too involved in our lives, but she's been my closest friend through some very difficult times." "It's not just about Victoria," Edmund replied, though they both knew her influence had been a major factor. "It's about us, Isabella. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When did we last make a decision together without consulting someone else? We've become strangers who happen to live in the same palace." The conversation that followed was painful but honest. Both acknowledged that their marriage had deteriorated beyond repair, that they had different needs and desires for their future, and that staying together would only make both of them more miserable. "What happens now?" Isabella asked quietly. Edmund took a deep breath. "I think we need to separate, officially. I've already consulted with legal advisors about the process." Isabella nodded slowly, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Will we be able to remain friends? For the sake of Alexander and the grandchildren?" "I hope so," Edmund said, reaching across to take her hand. "I don't want our personal problems to destroy everything we've built together. You're still the mother of my child, and a wonderful queen to this kingdom." As they sat together in the morning light, both realized that their marriage was truly over. The fairy tale that had captivated the world 25 years ago was coming to an end, and soon the entire kingdom would have to face the reality that even royal love stories don't always last forever. The week following Edmund and Isabella's private conversation was filled with careful planning and discreet consultations. Both understood that announcing their separation would create a media storm unlike anything the kingdom had seen in decades. Every detail had to be managed meticulously to minimize damage to the monarchy and protect their family's privacy as much as possible. Lady Victoria Ashworth had been notably absent from the palace during these crucial days. Isabella had asked her to return to her own estate, while the royal couple worked through their personal matters. This request had caused some tension between the longtime friends, as Victoria felt she was being blamed for the marriage's collapse. "I need space to think clearly about my future," Isabella had explained to Victoria during their last private conversation. "Your friendship means everything to me, but right now, I need to face this situation without outside influence." Victoria had reluctantly agreed, but her departure from the palace felt like another ending in Isabella's life. The woman who had been her constant companion was gone, and now her marriage was ending too. Isabella found herself truly alone for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Edmund was working with his communications team to craft a statement that would explain the separation without revealing too many intimate details. The royal press secretary, Margaret Whitmore, had served the palace for over a decade and had handled numerous crises, but nothing quite like this. "Your Majesty, we need to control the narrative from the beginning," Margaret advised during one of their strategy sessions. "The media will speculate wildly if we don't provide enough information, but too much detail will turn this into tabloid entertainment." Edmund agreed, knowing that every word of the announcement would be analyzed and dissected by media outlets around the world. The statement needed to be dignified, honest, and final enough to discourage ongoing speculation. Prince Alexander had taken on the difficult task of preparing his young children for the news. Princess Emma, age 7, and Prince William, age 5, would need age-appropriate explanations for why grandfather and grandmother King wouldn't be living together anymore. "Grandfather still loves grandmother very much," Alexander explained to his children during a quiet afternoon in the palace garden. "But sometimes adults decide they'll be happier living in different places. It doesn't change how much they love our family." Princess Sarah watched her husband handle this delicate conversation with their children, recognizing how the experience was preparing him for his own future role as king. The stability of his own marriage would be crucial for rebuilding public confidence in the royal family after his parents' separation. The financial negotiations proved to be more complex than anyone had anticipated. Queen Isabella would retain her title and continue to live in the palace's east wing, while Edmund would remain in the main royal apartments. This arrangement would allow them to maintain their official duties while living essentially separate lives. Isabella's personal assets, including jewelry, art collections, and investments accumulated during the marriage, would remain with her. The royal trust funds and official crown jewels would stay with Edmund as the reigning monarch. Both agreed that their priority was ensuring Prince Alexander's inheritance remained intact for the future of the monarchy. The financial settlement is generous, but not excessive, Sir Richard explained to Edmund during one of their final legal consultations. Queen Isabella will maintain a lifestyle appropriate to her status, but the royal treasury won't be depleted to the point of affecting state functions. As the announcement date approached, both Edmund and Isabella began to feel a mixture of anxiety and relief. The pretense that had exhausted them both for months would finally end, but they would face public scrutiny unlike anything they had experienced before. Isabella spent her final days as a married woman writing personal letters to close friends and family members, wanting them to hear the news directly from her rather than through media reports. Her letter to her sister in France was particularly emotional, as she tried to explain how a marriage that had seemed so perfect to the outside world had slowly crumbled from within. "The hardest part," Isabella wrote, "is knowing that we simply grew apart despite our best efforts to stay connected. Edmund is a good man and a wonderful king, but we became different people who wanted different things from life. Sometimes love isn't enough to bridge those differences." Edmund used his final days before the announcement to meet privately with key government officials, religious leaders, and Commonwealth representatives. He wanted to assure them that his personal situation wouldn't affect his ability to fulfill his constitutional duties as monarch. "My commitment to the kingdom and its people remains absolute," he told Prime Minister Jonathan Harrison during their confidential meeting. "This personal decision will not impact my dedication to serving as your king." The Prime Minister assured Edmund of the government's continued support, though he privately worried about how the separation would affect upcoming elections. The royal family's stability had always been a source of national pride, and this development would likely become a political issue. On the evening before the announcement, Edmund and Isabella shared one final private dinner together as husband and wife. They ate in comfortable silence for most of the meal, both lost in memories of better times and contemplation of their uncertain futures. "Do you think we'll be able to look back on this someday without regret?" Isabella asked as they finished their dessert. Edmund considered the question carefully. "I think we'll remember the good times with fondness and the difficult times as lessons learned. Maybe that's the best any couple can hope for." They agreed to attend the press conference together the next morning, presenting a united front despite their decision to separate. The image they wanted to convey was one of mutual respect and shared concern for their family and the kingdom's welfare. "Tomorrow changes everything," Isabella said as they prepared to part for the night. "Yes," Edmund agreed, "but maybe change is exactly what we both need." As they said goodnight, both felt a sense of finality that was both heartbreaking and liberating. 25 years of marriage would officially end with tomorrow's announcement, but both hoped they could begin new chapters of their lives with dignity and grace. The palace staff had been briefed on the situation and sworn to absolute secrecy until the public announcement. Many of them had served the royal family for years and were genuinely saddened by the news, having witnessed the slow deterioration of the marriage firsthand. James Morrison, Edmund's loyal private secretary, spent the evening making final preparations for what would undoubtedly be one of the most challenging days in recent royal history. Tomorrow, the fairy tale would officially end, and the real work of rebuilding and moving forward would begin. As midnight approached, both Edmund and Isabella lay awake in their separate bedrooms, staring at the ceiling and wondering what their lives would look like a year from now. The decision had been made, the plans were in place, and tomorrow the world would know that even royal marriages sometimes come to an end. The king and queen of Aldoria were about to face their greatest challenge not as a united couple, but as two individuals who had chosen different paths toward happiness and fulfillment. The kingdom would watch, judge, and eventually adapt to this new reality, just as Edmund and Isabella themselves would have to learn to live with the consequences of their choice. The morning of the announcement dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the palace windows as if nature itself was preparing for a new beginning. Edmund awoke earlier than usual, having barely slept through the night. Today would mark the end of one chapter of his life, and the beginning of another, uncertain one. Isabella had also risen early, spending extra time preparing her appearance for what would likely be one of the most photographed moments of her life. She chose a simple but elegant navy blue dress, understanding that every detail would be scrutinized by media outlets and royal watchers around the world. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the palace's formal briefing room. Margaret Whitmore had worked through the night with her team to ensure that accredited journalists from major news organizations would be present, while security measures were heightened to manage the expected chaos. At 9:30, Edmund and Isabella met in the private corridor leading to the briefing room. They hadn't seen each other since their dinner the previous evening, and both noticed the strain in the other's face. "Are you ready for this?" Edmund asked gently, straightening his tie. "As ready as one can be for ending a marriage in front of the world's media," Isabella replied with a sad smile. Prince Alexander and Princess Sarah arrived to offer their support, having arranged for the grandchildren to be taken to their private residence outside the city. The young prince looked tense but determined, knowing that his parents' announcement would thrust him further into the spotlight as the future king. "Whatever happens in there, we're a family," Alexander said, embracing both his parents. "The public may judge, but we'll face this together." Margaret Whitmore approached them with final updates on the media presence. "Your Majesties, we have representatives from 43 news organizations present, including international correspondents. The statement has been distributed, but they'll certainly have questions afterward." Edmund and Isabella had agreed that Edmund would read the prepared statement, while Isabella would remain silent, but supportive beside him. They wanted to present an image of unity despite their personal decision to separate. At exactly 10 o'clock, they entered the briefing room together. The flash of cameras was immediate and intense, creating an almost blinding strobe effect as they took their positions behind the podium. The room fell silent as Edmund began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, Queen Isabella and I have asked you here today to share a deeply personal decision that affects not only our family, but the future of the monarchy. After 25 years of marriage and extensive private consideration, we have decided to separate." The room erupted in a controlled chaos of raised hands and shouted questions, but Edmund continued reading the prepared statement. "This decision was not made lightly, and it reflects our mutual recognition that we have grown apart as individuals. While our love for each other has evolved, our commitment to our son, our grandchildren, and the people of Aldoria remains absolute." Isabella stood beside her husband with perfect composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in front of her. The statement continued for several more minutes, addressing practical matters such as their continued royal duties, living arrangements, and the unchanged line of succession. When Edmund finished reading, the questions began immediately. "Your Majesty, what role did Lady Victoria Ashworth play in this decision?" called out a reporter from the Royal Times. Edmund had anticipated this question and had prepared his response carefully. "This separation is the result of personal differences between the Queen and myself. We ask that you respect the privacy of all individuals involved and focus on the official aspects of this announcement." Another journalist pressed further. "Will Queen Isabella retain her title and royal duties?" "Queen Isabella will continue to hold her title and will maintain her official royal responsibilities," Edmund confirmed. "We believe this arrangement serves the best interests of the monarchy and the kingdom." The questions continued for nearly 30 minutes, with both Edmund and Isabella handling the intense scrutiny with remarkable grace. When asked about their personal feelings, Isabella spoke for the first time during the conference. "This has been the most difficult decision of my life," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible in her eyes. "King Edmund and I both believe this is the right choice for our individual happiness and the future of our family." As the press conference concluded, Edmund and Isabella left the room together but parted ways in the corridor, symbolically beginning their new separate lives. The media would spend the rest of the day analyzing every word, gesture, and facial expression from the announcement. Within hours, the story had become international news. Television networks interrupted regular programming to report on the royal separation, while social media platforms buzzed with reactions ranging from shock to sympathy to criticism. Public opinion was deeply divided, with some supporting the couple's honesty and others condemning them for abandoning their royal duties to their marriage. The afternoon brought meetings with palace staff who needed to understand how the new living arrangements would affect their daily operations. The logistics of maintaining two separate royal households within the same palace complex proved challenging but not insurmountable. Edmund spent his afternoon in meetings with government officials who wanted to understand the political implications of the separation. Prime Minister Harrison arrived for an emergency consultation, concerned about how the news might affect upcoming parliamentary elections. The opposition party is already preparing statements, the Prime Minister warned. They're likely to use this as evidence that the royal family is out of touch with traditional values. Edmund listened to the political concerns, but remained firm in his decision. My personal life cannot be dictated by electoral politics, he responded. The monarchy must evolve to remain relevant, and that includes acknowledging that even royal marriages can end. Meanwhile, Isabella met with her own circle of advisors to plan her future role within the royal family. She would continue her charitable work and public appearances, but would need to establish her own identity separate from her role as Edmund's wife. Lady Victoria Ashworth had been conspicuously absent throughout the day, remaining at her countryside estate rather than offering public support to her friend. This absence did not go unnoticed by the media, who began speculating about the true extent of her influence on the royal separation. By evening, both Edmund and Isabella were emotionally and physically exhausted. They had managed the most difficult day of their public lives with dignity, but the real challenge would be adapting to their new reality in the days and weeks to come. Prince Alexander and Princess Sarah returned to the palace that evening to check on both parents. They found Edmund in his study, surrounded by newspapers and tablets displaying coverage of the day's announcement. "How are you feeling, father?" Alexander asked, settling into a chair beside the king's desk. "Relieved, anxious, sad, hopeful," Edmund replied honestly. "I suppose that covers the full range of human emotion." Princess Sarah went to visit Isabella, finding the queen in her private sitting room, still wearing the navy dress from the morning's press conference. "How can we support you through this transition?" Sarah asked gently. "Just by being yourselves," Isabella replied. "The hardest part is over now. We've told the truth, and we can begin moving forward." As night fell over the palace, both Edmund and Isabella reflected on the day that had changed everything. The marriage that had begun with such hope and celebration 25 years earlier had ended with dignity and mutual respect, even amid the circus of media attention and public scrutiny. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they learned to navigate their roles as separated royals, but tonight they could finally rest knowing that the pretense was over and their new lives had officially begun. The fairy tale was finished, but perhaps, they both hoped, something more authentic and fulfilling could take its place. 6 months after the separation announcement, the kingdom of Aldoria had settled into a new normal that few could have imagined. The initial media frenzy had gradually subsided, replaced by a cautious acceptance of the royal family's new configuration. Public opinion polls showed a nation divided but slowly adapting to the reality that even their monarchs were human beings capable of making difficult personal decisions. King Edmund had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed energy and purpose. Without the constant tension of a failing marriage weighing on him, he seemed more engaged during public appearances and more decisive in his leadership role. The economic initiatives he had been developing with Parliament were finally moving forward, and his approval ratings, after an initial dip following the separation announcement, had begun to recover. Queen Isabella had also found her footing in her new role as a separated but still active royal. She had expanded her charitable work significantly, focusing particularly on organizations that supported women facing major life transitions. Her authenticity and vulnerability in discussing her own struggles had resonated with many citizens who had initially criticized her decision to separate from the king. The most surprising development had been the public's growing respect for how both Edmund and Isabella had handled their separation with dignity and mutual respect. Unlike celebrity divorces that devolved into bitter public battles, the royal couple had maintained their friendship and continued to co-parent their adult son and share grandparenting duties with remarkable grace. Prince Alexander had emerged as a stabilizing force for the monarchy during this period of transition. His own strong marriage to Princess Sarah provided the public with confidence that the next generation of royals understood the importance of commitment and family values. He had begun taking on more official duties, preparing for his eventual succession to the throne. The Autumn Ball, traditionally hosted jointly by the king and queen, had been restructured as separate events. Edmund hosted a formal state dinner focusing on diplomatic relations and international partnerships, while Isabella organized a charitable gala supporting women's organizations and family services. Both events were successful and well-attended, proving that the royal family could function effectively in their new configuration. Lady Victoria Ashworth had gradually returned to public life, though her relationship with Isabella had been permanently altered by the events surrounding the separation. While they remained friends, the intense daily companionship that had characterized their relationship was replaced by more occasional contact. Victoria had begun pursuing her own charitable interests and had started writing a memoir about her years in royal circles, though she was careful to avoid any controversial revelations about the royal marriage. The financial arrangements of the separation had been finalized without major complications. Isabella's new household staff had been established, and the practical aspects of maintaining two separate royal residences within the same palace complex had been resolved. The cost to the royal treasury was significant, but manageable, and Parliament had approved the necessary budget adjustments without major controversy. One unexpected consequence of the separation had been increased public interest in the monarchy's modernization efforts. Edmund's willingness to prioritize personal happiness over traditional expectations had been seen by many younger citizens as evidence that the royal family was evolving with changing social values. Discussions about the monarchy's role in contemporary society had become more nuanced and thoughtful. The grandchildren, Princess Emma and Prince William, had adapted well to their grandparents' new living arrangements. Both Edmund and Isabella made special efforts to maintain consistent relationships with the children, who seemed to benefit from having more individual attention from each grandparent. Family gatherings had become more carefully planned, but no less warm or meaningful. As spring arrived, bringing with it the traditional season of royal garden parties and public events, both Edmund and Isabella felt more confident in their new roles. The initial awkwardness of appearing at the same events as separated spouses had given way to a comfortable professionalism that impressed both the media and the public. Edmund had begun to explore interests that he had set aside during his marriage, including a passion for environmental conservation that had led to several new royal initiatives. Without needing to coordinate his schedule and interests with Isabella's preferences, he found himself more able to pursue meaningful projects that reflected his personal values and vision for the kingdom. Isabella had discovered a new sense of independence that she hadn't experienced since her youth. Her charitable work had become more focused and effective, and she had begun accepting speaking engagements about resilience and personal growth that would have been impossible while maintaining the facade of a perfect royal marriage. The media had eventually found other stories to pursue, though the royal separation remained a topic of occasional speculation and analysis. Both Edmund and Isabella had learned to navigate the continued public interest in their personal lives while maintaining appropriate boundaries about their privacy. 1 year after the separation announcement, a major television documentary examined the impact of the royal split on the monarchy and the kingdom. The program featured interviews with constitutional experts, political analysts, and ordinary citizens, painting a picture of a nation that had initially been shocked but ultimately respected the royal couple's honesty and courage. They showed us that it's possible to end a relationship with dignity, commented one citizen interviewed for the documentary. That's actually a more valuable lesson than pretending everything is perfect when it clearly isn't. The documentary also noted that both Edmund and Isabella seemed happier and more authentic in their public roles than they had appeared in years. Their willingness to prioritize personal truth over public expectations had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy's connection to its people. As the story concluded, both Edmund and Isabella had found peace with their decision and were building meaningful new chapters of their lives. Their separation, while initially shocking, had become a testament to the possibility of handling life's most difficult transitions with grace, honesty, and mutual respect. The fairy tale marriage was over, but the story of two people who chose authenticity over pretense and who found the courage to rebuild their lives with dignity had become an inspiration to many who faced their own difficult choices. The kingdom of Aldoria had learned that even its royals were human, and Perhaps that lesson made the monarchy more relevant and relatable than it had ever been before. Prince Alexander and Princess Sarah continued to represent the future of the royal family, their strong partnership providing continuity and stability as the kingdom adapted to its new reality. The next generation would inherit a monarchy that had proven it could evolve and remain authentic to contemporary values while maintaining its essential dignity and service to the people. In the end, the greatest royal shock had become the foundation for a more honest and sustainable future, proving that sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations.